What's up, everyone? I'm Evan Mezeske, the creator of Anukari, and today we're going to make this. Okay, that's recording. I've got 2 red lights. Okay, cool. So to build that preset, I'm going to start off here. This is the default Anukari preset. I'm going to select it all. I'm going to delete it, start from a completely clean slate. So I have this idea that I want to start with a string of masses. So I'm going to turn on the grid here, and I'm just going to bring in a few body objects. That many. And I brought them onto the grid so that they're spaced in a regular way. Then I'm going to connect them. And for this, I'm going to use the hotkey because it's just a little bit faster. So I press C. And I want the string to be a bit longer than that. I'm going to be a bit lazy, and instead of creating 7 more of these, I'm just going to duplicate. The hotkey for duplicate is Control D. Drag it over here. I'm going to pause the simulation and undo, reset it. Yeah, so what we just saw there with a bunch of chaos was the simulation was running, and I started moving these around, and they're not tied down, and so you get that. Goodbye. So I'm going to pause the simulation. I'm going to leave the simulation pause while we continue to work on it, and I just reset it back to its resting state. So now we have this string of body objects. This time I'm going to tie it down because I don't want it to fly away in a ridiculous manner. And I'm going to use the C hotkey to connect the ends of the string. And at this point, I'm going to turn off the grid. I don't need that anymore. I got a nice regular spacing. So here's our string. In reality, if I was going to create this string, I might just go pick a factory preset and chop stuff out of it and grab some string-like object, but it's pretty easy to create this thing from scratch too. If I turn the simulation back on, it vibrates, but we're not getting any sound. And so I'm going to drag in a mic object and another mic object. I'm going to enter rotation mode. When rotation mode is on, the objects with this green little sphere around them rotate when you drag them. So I'm going to point them kind of at the string I made. And again, I'm going to use the connect hotkey C, and I'm just going to connect these mics to some of the bodies, and I'm kind of just picking randomly here. Just get a variety of connections. Oop, I missed. Okay, let's see what happens if I drag it. Okay, so now we're getting some sound, and getting some distorted sound because I dragged it back really far and the mic gain is kind of high. Okay, now we have a string. We're making some sound. I want to introduce vibrations into the string by using gravity. So normally you might use an exciter like a mallet or an oscillator or a bow, but the latest Anukari lets you modulate gravity. And so if I select these body objects and increase the gravity, you'll see that it pulls them down, or you can have gravity that goes the other direction, pushes them up. And if I were to swing that back and forth, get some sound. In the palette, I'm going to go to modulator. I'm going to find LFO. And with all the body objects selected, I can drag that LFO onto gravity and drop it. I'm going to pause the simulation. That's kind of loud. But what you heard is that the LFO is modulating gravity from positive gravity to negative gravity, and it's moving everything around. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the modulator links, the green connections. See, the target is set to gravity because I dragged the LFO onto the gravity parameter. And I'm going to decrease the depth. In fact, let's make it quite small. Let's try somewhere there. And I'm going to start the simulation again. Okay, so I think that's kind of where I want to start here. Now, having the LFO just running freely and constantly changing the gravity is not going to be a very playable instrument. And so the trick I'm going to use is I'm going to select the LFO, and I'm going to drag in a trigger envelope object. And I'm going to drag it onto the modulator, the heading up here. And what that's going to do is it's going to create a trigger envelope that is modulating the LFO's depth. And so if I look at the modulator link, it's set to target depth. And I'm going to set this to multiply. and I'm going to set the depth to 1.0. And all this is going to do is it's going to set this envelope to basically turn on or off the LFO's modulation. It's going to multiply the LFO's depth from 0 to 1 based on the value of this envelope, this ADSR envelope. And so now when I play the simulation, let's see what happens. Okay, it's calming down. I'll reset it. So now, if I play a note on the keyboard, it starts vibrating. If I release the note, it should stop. So we want to get vibration that makes noise instead of just this slow up down. What's happening is that the LFO right now is set to a frequency of 1 hertz. I'm going to crank that up to, say, 40 hertz, somewhere in there. And let's see what that sounds like. Okay, we're getting some kind of cinematic sound. Now, depending on where I play on the keyboard, we're getting kind of different sounds, but we're not getting sounds that are really the right pitch for each key. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Use Dilated Time on this LFO, and that's going to set the LFO's rate to be adjusted based on what note I play on the MIDI keyboard, and eventually this is going to let us get the right pitches. Okay, so right now we're hearing this kind of very chaotic sound. And the reason for that is that there's not a lot of damping in the system. Damping on bodies is what causes them to slow down and eventually come to rest. So if I play this note, let's increase the damping. Okay, now when I release the note, it comes to rest a lot more quickly. I'm also going to decrease the attack on the envelope. Let's put it somewhere maybe down around 1/4 of a second. Okay, now I'm going to make some changes to both the springs and the body objects. So the body objects are all at the default mass, 1 gram. I'm going to set one of them to something quite heavy. You notice it got bigger. And I'm going to select all these body objects. And now the slider here for mass on the body objects, because I have multiple body objects selected, shows that there's a range of values from 1 to 25.3 in this case. And I can drag either end of this to adjust that range. And if I click this little die icon, I can randomize the body mass within that parameter range. So they're all going to stay between 1 and 20 something, but I can randomize them. And we'll play with this a little bit later. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select all the springs. And one thing you might have seen me do here, but I didn't call out, really helpful tip when editing presets in Anukari is select a bunch of stuff, including things that you don't really want to select. Here I want to select all the springs, and I'm dragging a box. I'm selecting all kinds of other stuff, bodies, anchors. And then if you go over to the right-hand panel, there's a little filter icon next to each type of object, and clicking that will reduce the selection to just that type of object. So you can drag a box that gets everything you want and then some, and then you can reduce it to just the things you care about, in this case, springs. And here I'm going to use a trick that I use a lot, which is I'm going to reduce the length of the springs, which is going to introduce some tension into the system. When I created them, everything was on that grid and everything was spaced apart evenly. And when I created the springs, they were set to be sort of neutrally at that length. But I want to tighten things up a little bit. And so stretch things out. And you notice that the string of objects got tighter as I did that. Let's hear what it sounds like now. Okay, I'm not hearing much. I'm going to adjust the mic gain. And then I'm going to adjust the depth of the LFO connections. Okay, so I'm starting to get some kind of interesting sound here. So the next thing I want to do, I'm trying to create kind of an aggressive sound. This is not a very aggressive sound. It's a good bass sound. But I'm going to grab these two microphones and I'm going to increase their isotropy parameter, which is a form of distortion in Anukari's microphones. And let's hear what that sounds like. All right, it's definitely introduced some overtones, a little bit more of an aggressive sound. And I think it would be fun to modulate that parameter. So I'm going to, under the modulators in the palette, I'm going to drag an LFO onto isotropy. And I'm going to adjust the depth to about half. So we'll sweep over the full range of isotropy. Let's hear how that sounds. Cool. Clicking the modulator, I'm going to adjust the frequency. And actually, I'm going to set this to be tempo synced. So instead of a free running frequency, it's going to be BPM synced. So this would be a quarter note. Quarter note triplet. I kind of like that. And I'm going to set the re-trigger parameter so that whenever I press a note, this LFO's phase will start over. I'll figure out where I want it to start. Okay, I like that sound. I want to make it much more gritty. And so I'm going to go into the FX objects and I'm going to grab a distortion, drag that in, and I'm going to select the mics. And again, I'm going to use this trick where I click the filter to reduce the selection to only the mics in that box that I dragged. I'm going to right click on that distortion and connect all selected objects to this. So now the microphones are feeding audio data into this distortion object. Now I'm going to select the mics again, and I'm going to turn off their external output. So the microphones will no longer send audio data directly to my speakers. They're going to send audio data only to that distortion object. Let's hear how that sounds. Okay, the soft clip is not really doing it. I'm going to go to the bit crusher. Let's give it some drive. Okay, that's a lot more what I'm going for. I love Psytrance music, and for that reason, Anukari has a Formant shifter, and a Formant filter rather. And a Formant filter is a filter that, to some extent, approximates the kind of vowel sounds that a human mouth can make. And we're going to hook that up. So I'm going to click the distortion object. I'm going to connect it to that Formant filter. And then again, like I did to the mics, I'm going to disable the external output for this object so that it only feeds the audio output forward into the next one. Let's hear how that sounds. Okay, so there's some filtering going on. Let's play with the parameters a bit. So you can hear some kind of vowel sounds. And that's definitely something that I want to modulate. So let's go back to modulators. I have the object selected, and let's bring an LFO onto the vowel parameter. That's cool, but actually I'm realizing now probably not an LFO. This probably calls for more like an envelope. Instead of dragging in a new object, in this case, I can just change the mode of this modulator from LFO to envelope generator. Okay. I just selected the modulator link, so the connection from that envelope to the Formant filter. And I think I'm going to invert the signal so that instead of raising the vowel position, it's going to lower the vowel position. Okay, I'm liking that. I'm going to mess with the envelope parameters a bit, maybe speed up the attack. Okay, so you might have noticed that the output level here is clipping a lot. I probably should just decrease the output gain a little bit. But also what I'm going to do, because I want to keep things really aggressive, I'm going to flatten them out by adding a compressor object. So let's find the compressor, bring it in. Using the C hotkey, I'm going to connect it as the next object in that chain. And similarly, I'm going to disable the external output for the Formant filter, so that the only thing externally outputting audio is now the compressor. Okay, I'm going to mess with some compressor parameters. So at this point, it's pretty much a working preset. I think it's cool. But anytime I build a preset like this, the next thing I'm going to look at is adding some kind of cool macros so that I have knobs that I can turn on my keyboard. The way I tend to approach that is I'll, look at various objects and mess with their parameters in the right-hand editor panel until I find a parameter that is fun to edit, and then I'll create a macro for that. The 1.03 release of Anukari that just came out has a new parameter for bodies in addition to gravity called turbulence. Let's hear what that sounds like. Okay, for this preset, it's adding some grit. Turbulence is basically letting the velocity of these objects sort of randomly move around. It can add noise to presets or space to presets, but with this much distortion, it's just adding grit, and I kind of like that. So I'm going to go over to the macro panel here in the lower right. I'm going to drag this macro onto turbulence. I'm going to go edit the name and just give it something, like, we'll call it grit. So this macro in Anukari, especially in the standalone app, the 8 macros are going to map to, there's some default settings for how they'll map to your MIDI controller. And with this MPK keyboard, they map to these knobs kind of perfectly. So I'm going to just try turning the knob. Okay, I think I want a bit more depth. Cool. Okay, so that's one macro. I'm going to come back to the distortion because when I was adjusting the decimation parameter, I was having fun with that. So let's hear how this sounds. Clearly a fun parameter to mess with. So I'm going to take the next macro and I'm going to drag it onto decimation. So that created this macro. And the decimation is kind of at a high value right now, and lowering it was an interesting change. So I'm going to set the macro to invert. So increasing the macro will decrease the value of the decimation parameter. And I'm going to set the depth up pretty high. Let's hear how that goes. Okay, I'm going to call that one smooth. And let's take a look at the Formant filter. What kind of stuff do we have to play with there? Okay, changing the size, pretty fun. I'm going to add another macro. Again, this is a case where reducing it was the fun thing. So I'm going to set this to invert. Let's hear how that works. Cool. Let's call that one shrink. The envelope that we're using to turn on the gravity modulation has kind of a slow attack and release. I'm going to see what happens if I just speed that up a bit. Okay, Okay, and let's maybe add some decay and reduce the sustain. So this is now a working preset. If I was going to try and make this a factory preset, I'd probably be doing some things like tweaking the compressor. I think we're still clipping occasionally, stuff like that, like mastering the preset. But instead of doing that, I'm just going to go a little bit further, and then let's just play around with it. So I'm a sucker for reverb. I add too much reverb to every preset I make if I'm allowed to. So I'm going to do that here. So again, I'm connecting reverb to the end of my FX chain. Let's hear how that sounds. Okay, let's dry it out a bit. I'm going to go to one of the shimmer reverbs. And here, I'm just messing with some of the parameters a little bit randomly. I know something about what these are going to do, but I'm just screwing around until I find something that sounds cool. We got to the perfect amount of too much reverb, so I'm going to leave it there. Last thing I'm going to do is just mess around with some visual settings. I think we all know I love my clouds, my beautiful background. This is a pretty aggressive sound. I think it calls for something a bit more aggressive. I'm actually going to just hit the randomize button a few times and see what happens. Maybe we'll get something cool. Okay, I like this. I'm not in love with the colors. I'm going to change the color gradient. I kind of do like, Going to enter into, oh, let's see, I'll turn on camera automation. Maybe let's, oops. Set it to move the camera a bit more rapidly. I'm going to enter cinematic mode, which just hides the GUI. Play a little bit. That's pretty crazy. That was fun, and thanks for letting me show you how to make that preset.